like to start this workshop with this truly magnificent coca bag from coastal Peru, probably from the pre-Columbian era, which means it's several hundred years old. The bag body has cotton and alpaca and complementary warp patterning. These wonderful tassels have sumac twining and even a kind of interplying in the bottom area. It shows to perfection the kind of skill and design expertise that these Indian weavers lavished on the things that they made. Hi, I'm Jaquetta Nisbet, and we're going to, in this workshop, we're going to study this kind of pattern picking, supplementary warp pattern picking on the Inkle Loom. We'll make a bag like this, but we'll start with narrow textile, which can ultimately be the strap for the bag, just as it is here, or it can be belts. And anyway, it affords you a chance really to practice and get very comfortable with the technique. It's a wonderful technique to learn because it's full of freedom to, once you're familiar with it, you can design as you go along and have lots of fun with it. I want to show you a few of these nice textiles from various parts of the world, mostly from the Americas. These are little coca bags from South America, from Peru, and this little guy here has, believe it or not, 110 warps per inch. It also has a kind of fringe, which is not done in many parts of Peru, and we're going to incorporate that idea also in what we do. Here, for instance, is a piece from Russia made by my friend Alyona in Leningrad. It's also done in Finland and Central Asia, so it's quite a cosmic weave. Let's look at some other textiles from the Andean area. These beautiful bags also belong to Ellen, some of them, and they show different styles, mostly made of alpaca, but still using this pattern technique. They have very different character. This one is rather calm and serene. Here's one where the patterns are really crowded in and the texture rises up in a lovely way. Here's a little one that combines with other pattern making techniques like complementary warp patterning. And another one from the northern part of Bolivia, where an extra color is added, giving you a whole other factor to play with. And a really nice poncho from the Cusco area of Peru. Now let's look at some of the Inkle looms that we can use for doing this kind of weaving. Here are three really nice Inkle looms. The first one, the shaft, has a tensioning device up at the front. It's very strong. The heddles are right here. The Gilmore also has a tensioning device and is very sturdy. And here is the way you ease up on the warp tension. And the heddles are right in here. This Hansen is even bigger. It has 8-inch pegs instead of 6 and 5 on the other ones. It has a nice tensioning device back here, and the heddles are right here. You have to be aware of buying Inkle looms that are inadequate for the job if they have two sides or the wood is too weak or they don't have a proper tensioning device on them. There's still two of my favorite books for this kind of weaving are the classics by Mary Atwater and Harriet Tidball. They're old, but they're good. You've probably noticed by now that I've got a different prop on. I made this jacket on Inkle looms. The wide strips were made on the Hansen, the narrower ones were made on the Gilmore. It's my ceremonial garment to celebrate the fact that most cultures who do this kind of weaving do have ceremonial garments as well. Now let's take a look at the materials that we want to use for the project that we're going to weave. Let's take a look now at some of the things that you're going to need, the materials and tools in order to weave this project. First of all, of course, the Inkle Loom, maybe something to raise it up a little if you're working on the floor, the way I like to do. Tool bag with all those fascinating little things you use that you don't expect to. Heddle cotton, which is fine. It's lily frost tone or knit crochet. Either of those works fine. All these little tools, the regular stuff, scissors and so forth. Some nice strong string if you need to tie the loom down onto the bench. Battens and shuttles of various sizes. You're not going to need all of these things, but I just want you to see what kind of things are suitable. Then, for overspinning yarn, here are some spindles in case you don't have a spinning wheel. Sticks to wrap color tests on and plan how you want to weave your bag. Then, grosgrain ribbon for finishing. A nice variety of colored yarns. Some of them, these are not overspun. Then here's the same yarn overspun, ready for warping. Here's a cushion for the floor. I don't always use one, but it's nice if you're thin. And then graph paper and some pens for designing your own designs for weaving. Now I'm down on the floor where I really feel I can get to work. I don't know if you like to work on the floor or not, but it means if you drop things, they don't go very far. I want to make a word or two about the kinds of yarns that are suitable for a warp-faced textile. Basically, it's the same kind of yarns that you would use for a warp in any case. This is wool, so it needs to be as worsted as possible, strong, and if it needs to, then you want to add spin to it at a later stage. I have a big variety of colors here that I've used in the various bags that we're showing. The color theory in this is interesting. I try to keep 2 layers, that the ground warp is a certain kind of feel to it, and the pattern warp has a different kind of feel, and that these 2 layers should stay somewhat distinct from each other. So, for instance, when I bought this kitchen cloth, I thought it was interesting if you close your eyes a little bit so that you only see it indistinctly, the gray and the orange jump out. So that would make 1 layer, and the purple and the red and black tend to recede a bit. So that would make another layer. In this bag, I have kind of mud versus brighter colors. In this warp here, I have pale colors against bright colors, just so long as you can see the pattern distinctly. Another help in planning your color, I find, is to do a yarn winding. Now, this is a yarn winding that I did prior to weaving this tool bag. And you can see how the relationship of winding a test stick to the actual weaving works out. The color theory in this one, incidentally, of course, is much simpler because it's a tonal contrast rather than a contrast of almost equal hue. All of these yarn windings have resulted in various pieces of weaving. There's a nice videotape about color by Donna Sullivan, and it might help you to consult that at some point. In preparing these yarns, we want really to, for an added reason, we have to have them tightly spun. It's that fringe that I mentioned before. We want something that will do this kind of thing. If you can imagine, now this is how a Bolivian weaver would stash his or her weaving in a little bag or something and be able to take it out while herding llamas in the field. But see how nicely it stretches out in order, but how very overspun and kinky it is. Well, that's just about what we want. To achieve that, if you don't have a spinning wheel, and oftentimes this is nice if you just need a few yards, to have a drop spindle, the first thing to look at is which way your spin is going, because you don't want to unspin the yarn. And this has an S spin. I'll try and, let me see, an S would go that way. So it's that slope. If your yarn is Z spin going that way, then of course you'll have to twirl the spindle in the other direction. So I'm going to go that way, add more S spin. I love drop spindles. They do so much work for the effort. Now, down here, I want to show this where you can see how it will ply on itself. That's what we're going to want the fringe to do. So you need that much spin on your yarn. Here's another nice spinning solution that's low cost, low tech, and you can take it with you when you go to visit your relatives. And just add this also. I didn't check, but yes, that's S spin also. This is nice. You put on a record of really lively bluegrass music and you just start spinning and staying with that until you get as much yarn as you want. It really dances. This takes a little practice to do, but one finger is just jumping the spindle back, so it can really spin quite fast. Now we will get started on understanding the Inkle Loom and how to warp it. The first thing to remember about an Inkle Loom is that it has a circular warp. Anything that you do in warping that interferes with the rotating ability is a real no-no. So you want to be sure that this goes in basically a circular pattern so the warp can move freely. On this little loom here, I want to show you how it is a real good idea to mark the place where your tensioner is established when you warp it. And then if somebody jogs the loom or for some reason this shifts, you can put it back in the same place and continue warping in the same way. Now, supposing this is a loom you've never met before and it comes with no directions at all, and you want to know how to make the heddles and how long the warp is and how wide the pegs, measure anything that you need to know, and including the maximum warp length, like this. I also want to put a guide string for the heddle that I'm going to make on this loom that I don't know anything about. Happens I've worked on a shark loom a lot, but this is let's pretend moment. Now, I'm just going to just wrap these loosely around here for the moment because I don't want to tie them off just yet. Now for a heddle, I'm going to want to make one that is double length and that brings this guide string right down to this exact same level as the open warp here. So I might make several guesses, for instance, that were wrong, and I might fetch up tying it around these 3 pegs here. And then I test it out. Here is the peg that holds the heddles. Take this around the guide string, give it one twist and bring it back down, and lo, eureka, it's at the right spot. Now if it wasn't, I'd just keep tying heddles till I got it right. That on a strange loom can take you a few minutes. And then I want to tie off the guide string and keep it on here to remind myself of what I was perhaps proposing to do. Now, if I didn't want to make a strap that was full length, I change the guide string and perhaps skip a peg or two. On an Inkle loom, it really gets pretty slithery if you don't use a little zigzag in there. If it goes all the way around just plain, it slips around a little bit, it rotates a little bit too easily. But this is the maximum, and so then you could measure exactly what that was. For our first piece, the narrow bag strap or belt, probably you don't need to worry too much about the length because you want, in any case, lots of practice space to learn the weave on. However, when you come to wanting an exact measurement, then you can measure either on your own body or on a bag that fits you exactly what length you want. And you can also gauge the 15 inches at each side of the bag and add that on if you want it going down the side. I'll start making heddles while you get ready to make 26 for your first textile. If you will get out the supplement that came in the video, you'll find the warping draft and follow it along while I point out what the different symbols mean. Here they are, and so when you come here, start with a heddle border warp and then an open border warp, and just 4 of those altogether. Where you see these 2 black squares means a pattern pair, and then the X's are the background warps. So then another pattern pair, but this time on the open half of the warp, and then background, background, pattern, pattern. And when it comes to color, probably in this first piece it would be wise to keep the background color all the same, but you can vary the pattern color and have perhaps 3 blue, 1 turquoise, 3 purple, 1 blue, 3 turquoise, and 3 blue, or whatever colors you choose, keeping them symmetrical. I did that color scheme on this piece here with the blue, turquoise, purple, turquoise, blue. And supposing that you decide your colors and warp up the loom, and then we'll be ready to start weaving. First, I'm getting the dark color for the border, and I'm just twisting it around that washer. It stops me from tying knots, which could complicate the warping process. I'm going the full circuit of the loom. Now this needs a heddle. I wrap these on the stick in groups of 10 and usually just perch them over my knee like this. It makes them real handy to get at. Now I want to apply the heddle, 1 twist around and down, and also I need to be able to release the tension a little at that point because there's a bit of take-up. And notice I'm not letting this yarn get away from me. If I do, what it does is go into instant plying, which is a real nuisance. I have 4 border warps. Now in warping the tension, I'm keeping a little on the easy side. It's best never ever to warp an Inkle Loom tight, because the tendency is, and I've proved it several times, to get tighter and tighter, and if you do that, you draw the pegs in and you ruin your Inkle Loom, which is a sad state of affairs. Okay, so this is the last of the border warps. And you test frequently, particularly on early pieces, but it's just wise in any case, and make sure that you're keeping a uniform tension all the way across. That's real important too. Now see how easy it is to take this off the washer. Just tie that little knot. I'm going to tie a surgical knot because I don't want a slip knot there. So instead of just one twist for square knot, I've got 2 twists for surgical knot. It's almost out of date now that surgical threads are apparently dissolve away. Push that back. Now I'm ready to start, and the pattern diagram, which I hope you're following along with me, it starts with 2 pattern warps on the heddle shed. You see we've gone heddle tab, heddle open, and now we do 2 rounds with the pattern warp, pattern color. And I'm just following along the same colors that I did on this band here. So it's a heddle. I could even just rest the yarn there if that. You'll find out what's most convenient way of doing this for yourself. And I'm still minding the tension very carefully. So you'll notice we have this pattern pair now. We want the paired because we want the pattern warps to cover and make a nice solid design. That felt a little tight to me, so I've released it and made the tension a little bit easier up there. Just keep the idea of a slightly relaxed, easy tension warp in your mind. Now I can put the end that I'm not finished with yet just around another washer and save the botheration of tying knots and untying them again. Here is the background color. So keeping in this tabby sequence, if you count this as just part of a tabby, then we come to an open background. And then a heddle background. Now that yarn is coming to its end, and so I'll tie it off and change to a similar color. Here we get the heddle on, and I want to release this a little bit, ease it up. Also, take a good look at this point. Make sure you don't have any twists, any little illicit spirals in the warp yarn, because that will also ruin your warp tension. You'll have too much yarn in there. Here comes another surgical knot. And this time, so it's gone heddle, heddle, open, and heddle. Now this will be 2 open warps for a pattern pair. Also should, and particularly until you're really used to doing this, take a good look from time to time and make sure that you're not doing something like going from there to this part here, because that would ruin the circulating warp. It wouldn't rotate if you make that kind of a mistake. It has to stay on the same track all the time. And sometimes you'll do that without knowing it and get way ahead on the warping, and then you have to take it all back again. I also keep pushing these in a little bit because it's less strain of the pegs, and I can see a little bit better whether I've done it right if it's kept together like that. Now I think we have one more pair coming, so I won't tie this off quite yet. So now I'm tying the last knot for the last warp, and when I cut this brown, I want to just show you about tucking the end in on the tail of your overspun warp so you don't lose twist that you're not aware of. Also won't get so tangled up, so just keep those little tails tucked in. Now I want to double check that the warp order is correct. I'm going to go just right across doing this with heddle, open, heddle, open, heddle, heddle, open, heddle, heddle, open, open, heddle, open, heddle, heddle, open, 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 heddle, open, open, heddle, open, heddle, heddle, and then open, heddle, open, and heddle. You want to just make sure that your pattern pairs really are alternating, and so are your background warps. Now I'm going to remove the guide string because I don't want to weave it into this bag strap. As long as I have it actually removed from this part, just for the moment, that is sufficient. Why we're doing this project on the Inkle Loom at all is interesting. It is specially designed for warp-faced narrow textiles. It has no spreader on it, so it tends to make a warp-faced textile in the first place. Then it's more convenient really than doing it on a backstrap for some items, and particularly for Western weavers. One could do this on the backstrap loom perfectly well, could also do it on a hole and slot loom, rigid heddle, or you could do it on the floor loom, but with the proviso that in that case you really probably want to take the reed off it, because it's very difficult to gauge how much exactly it will gather in unless you make a test, which would help. Now, why don't you get your loom warped, and then we'll be all ready to start weaving. Now we're ready to start weaving, and I can adjust the tension to exactly what I want for picking the pattern. That feels very nice now. Now I'm going to show you how to get the two sheds that make an Inkle Loom function as a loom. This is the up shed where the open warps are higher than the heddles. then the down shed where they go down below. This is called a fixed heddle loom because everything moves except the heddles, which is the opposite of what you're used to. See, up and down, which gives you your 2 sheds to weave with. Now, what I want to do is to start the weaving with a piece of white cord and just establish the width that I want it to begin at. It's not very easy to guess what that would be, so I'm going to change the shed and beat and work that in a little bit. Now, I might want to gather it way in, and I could do that at this point. However, I'm not going to try that just at this moment. We'll get this woven in and change the shed, and now it looks as though it's establishing at a really nice width. So I'll call it quits on this piece of cord and start in with the proper weft. I'm going to start by using a butterfly and then go on to using a shuttle, little belt shuttle. Now, I usually also go the same way. If I'm going on an up shed, I'm going from left to right, and vice versa on the down shed. This is just one of these handy little constants that help you to keep your place in what you're doing. All right, so here's the up shed, left to right, down shed. Now, at this point, I'll weave in the tail of the weft, of the brown weft, which incidentally is not overspun. That saves you lots of headaches. And also in the same shed, I'll weave the regular weft, butterfly. Now we'll go up shed, and I do kind of a wiggle. It's easier on the loom than beating like that. Little wiggle. I call it squinnying, which is just a descriptive kind of phoneticism. In getting nice edges, it's good to, there are 2 ways. One is to loop the weft around your finger, make sure it's coming out tight and going in tight. And then when you've got that established, clamp with your fingers and pull. That's one way. That's the way they do it in Guatemala. Then another nice way is to put the weft through, leave that same little taut loop, but instead of pulling it tight at this point, you change the shed and beat and then pull it. Either way is good. Do what's most comfortable for you. Now I suggest, just before you go on to weave, I want to show you how to change horses in midstream, so to speak. Supposing you've run out of weft, this is a good moment to show you how to change the weft and also the use of the little belt shuttle. So this whisker is coming out on the right, and I'll weave in the same direction, leave a whisker coming out on the left. As long as there's a whisker on each side in the same shed, you're probably in good shape. And we'll change shed, beat, and pull that little loop tight and weave. Now I'll put that little batten aside and weave and beat with all the same single tool and pull the loop tight here. Supposing you try and just practice doing plain weave to begin with, and as soon as you're comfortable with that, we'll go on to showing you how to pick the pattern as it is on the diagram. One of the rules with this kind of weaving is that you manipulate only the pattern pairs. You don't do anything with these orange kind of background warps. They just keep doing their normal up and down weaving rhythm. But I'll show you what we do with these pattern warps, which is something else again. You come in here at the side, in between 2 warps on each side of the pair that's down below, and you pick that up and add it to the top layer, and you've got one that you keep. You come along here to the next gap, go down and pick up that pair. I'm picking all the pattern pairs up from the bottom on this row just to show you how it's done. Pick up, here's the one, here's the alternate, go down and get it in between the 2 open background warps. Keep that one, and then there's a last sneaky one at the side. It's easy to forget to go for that one. Now you see I'd have a solid pattern phalanx showing on the front here. Now supposing that I want to drop some of these, that's the other manipulation that we're going to do to begin with. And so I'll come along, and instead of reaching for stuff from underneath, I'm going to drop the pattern pairs from the top and just let them go. Come along to this one and let it go. Drop it. Drop, 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 and there I am with only background warps left. But I haven't changed the background warps at all. It's only the pattern warps. And with those 2 manipulations, you can make all kinds of patterns. These are the pattern floats. Now, if you will find your printed supplement and take a look at the chart for the pattern diagram and start looking at that, we will begin to weave from that diagram. First, I'd like to explain what these symbols mean on the draft for the belt. Up here, a dark square means 1 pattern warp. Here it means a pattern pair. Down here, you have a slight change in how these symbols work. The single square now means a pattern pair, where the double dark means 2 pattern pairs. And you have to realize on here that any time you get a float, for instance, it's involving just 1 pattern pair. The checkerboard denotes plain weave. And this area is how the warp floats look when you have picked up, for instance, right in that area. And you would make a 3-span float if you pick the warp up right there. Down here, these little circles indicate dropped pattern pairs. I'm going to explain the X's later on. Meanwhile, let's weave. First, I need to rotate the warp a little bit. I also want to make the warp a little bit tighter. However, for rotating it, I want to have it like this and push it down a little bit. Snip off the whiskers. And tighten the warp a little bit again. Move the heddles up into their normal weaving position. And now I want to start actually picking the pattern for design number 1. This is the easiest one. They get progressively a little bit more difficult. So it's best to keep weaving pattern number 1 until you're really comfortable with it. You'll notice that the last plain weave row started with a pattern pair at the very edge. Therefore, when you weave row 2, you're going to pick up every other pattern pair. I'm using this little triangle to indicate what row I'm on. It makes it a little easier to read the pattern. Okay. Now, I'm going to pick up the first pair from below, like that. Come along, keep the second one. Go and pick for the third. Keep the fourth. Go between these background warps to pick up the next one. Keep, pick, keep, pick, keep, pick, and beat, and weave. Now at this point I want to be sure I'm drawing it in enough so that I have a nice covering pattern. I don't want it to look thinned out. I think this is pretty close to the right width. Now in changing shed, I'm doing actually another plain weave row. There are no pickups on it, it's just straight checkerboard. And the next row also, even though the pattern technically is starting right there. However, on this row, the fun begins. And we have plain weave at the sides, but the center, very center pattern pair picks up. On this next row, we'll pick up two pattern pairs, right here and here. Why don't you follow along on your chart while I weave the pattern? Now I still have a little plain weave at the sides, but my next pick is going to happen right in here. Pick up. Then everything is Jake until I get over here, pick up another one, and then leave the plain weave at the side. I'm going to rewind my weft a little bit. It's getting too long. Change shed, beat, pick. First of all, there's no pick at the side. We get this one here, pick up, pattern pair, keep. Now, coming to the first drop, the very center one is going to go down where you see a spot, little hollow spot, circle on your graph. And there's one more pick here, pattern pair coming up, beat and weave. Now we're getting really far out to the side now. Another pick for pattern. And now we get two drops and weft spots. And then pick pattern, pair, there. I'll just keep on weaving now and watch what I do, see if it makes sense to you. On the next row, I'm going to drop a pair, pick, and we leave the one in the middle, pick, and drop. Now the pattern starts to narrow down again. So, going to get a 5-span float. I'm picking the middle ones first in this case, because I want you to see how that 5-span float looks, and it helps me to see what I'm doing. I'm doing the drops at the side. They've come in one pair over. If you look on your pattern, you'll see now that the diamond is diminishing. Drop, pick, drop, and weave. Now we're back on repeating this solid area. Pick, drop, nothing to do in the middle, drop, and pick. Now pick and drop, drop, and pick. Pick and drop the center one. That's corresponding to right down there. And one more pick. Now we're beginning to get plain weave at the sides again. So pick, nothing to do in the middle. We did our last drop. Pick another pair. Pick, pick, and those are right down here. And, oh, I missed a pick. That's nice, we got a mistake. To show you how to take this out real easily. You put the shed back to the shed it was in when you made the mistake, and you pull the weft out at the left, make a nice tight loop there. You can see exactly what is up and down and get a nice clean return, mistake and all. Then I'll redo this row. Apparently I forgot to pick that pair, then pick that pair. With any luck, it's right this time. Now this is our last pick, like that. The last pick on the diamond, that is, but we still need to make that little solid bar at the top. So I have one plain row that I just did there. This is the beginning of the bar, but it's still plain weave. Now I'm going to pick all the down pairs, the back pairs, however you want to think of it. It's kind of thinking in a two-dimensional way. Got 'em? And one more plain weave, and we're done. Why don't you weave that pattern, weave it as many times as you need to feel comfortable with it. It's the simplest one to learn the technique on. And then we will work on patterns 2, 3, and 4. I've given you several patterns to work with. Now that you're adept at pattern number 1, I want to show you one or two things about these other patterns. Pattern 2 has something you haven't met before. Coming along and doing a whole row on an open shed of pick downs. In a couple of places in the next row, you're going to have to pick up right after a pick down. Just go ahead and do it. It'll work, but it might be confusing for you if I didn't explain. On pattern number 3, there is something that really is no change in your technique. It's just something that you have to watch for. When you're coming up here like this, you have pickups on each side, and then on this row you just have the pickup on the right side, and remember to leave that pair down because otherwise it won't do this nice, almost like a plied design. Now over here is the symbol that I mentioned before, but it first appears now in this design, and it's the X. And I thought after I had written the designs out, this is nice because X, you can think exchange, and that's precisely what you're going to do. So now, getting back to the weaving, I'm going to weave this row right on the first row that includes the X. I have a pick, and now here comes the X. I want to drop it, but instead of just dropping it, I want to pick up the 2 ground warps on either side of it. Now this is the first time we really break the basic rule of always leaving the ground warps in their normal plain weave sequence. So pick that, and now we want one more pattern pair and weave. And then you'll see what the result of doing this is. Change shed and pick the pattern pair at the side. I'll pick both the side pattern pairs, and now we'll concentrate on this exchange. Drop it and pick both of these. See right here on each side of that pattern pair. Just lift them up and keep them. Now here's the other one. We're going to do the same thing too. Drop that pattern pair and lift both these little guys on either side. And weave. I want to show you now how this looks. First of all, to compare the exchange area with the weft spot area, it looks quite different. Secondly, to compare widths and just check. Now this is working out at 1 1/4 inches. Now as I go along, I would keep that width and check on it every now and again. Also to make sure that the design is looking solid enough. I think this area here could do with being in just about 1/8 inch in order to get a nice solid appearance to the pattern weaving. Now go ahead and weave designs 2, 3, and 4. Sometimes you want to remove your warp before you've finished weaving it. You might be taking a plane trip and want to take several warps with you. You might have an urgent need to make something else. So you would, in that case, twine the unwoven warp, just like this, in little bunches. With the same cotton that you used for the heddles is just fine. And then a little overhand knot. Like that. You would do this on all the unwoven area of the warp. That will keep it, the warp in its right order. Make it easy to put it back on again. Now, for securing the rest of this warp, And so you can put it on and hit the right pegs. You want to have a nice long piece. I tie everywhere. I always figure it's going to go through a tornado. Tie there and tie here. Enough knots for start a whole navy. Okay, up here. And just one or two more. Here again. Now, a little bit just around the heddles here. And another little bit right up here to remind you that this goes over the top of the bar on the heddle half of the warp. Now I can release the tension bar and just whisk this off, and it's all hale and hearty, safe and sound. Looks like this. And when I want to put it back on again, when I've got where I'm going or coming back to this piece of weaving, I'll just put it in a real mess. And so I think first I'll put the heddles on, and then I want to recognize this part here, put that over, put it on without any twists, around there, and then following the track that it was on before. And I think we've got everything fixed. Get the tension back on, undo the knots, and go back to work. Now I'll show you how to finish off the belt that you finished weaving. I want to show you now how to finish the end of the belt and how to remove the whole warp from the loom. Do a nice little weave back here. I want to draw this in a little bit first before I do that. Then it's a nice way you can handle your sticks. Now I'm pulling that just a little bit too tight in order to draw it in. I did this at the other end. I thought it would look nice coming down into the side of the bag that way. Now put this through, and I want to keep the stick in here. I've got another stick here, and change the shed, put the other stick in, put them both on their sides like that, weave through there. I came left to right here, going right to left there. I'm doing kind of little snake dance here. Left to right. Now I remove this stick. I've beaten those down there. Bring this stick forward, beat it. Now we got to pull this one tight, then pull that one tight, and then the last one. And we got a tight ending I can just snip everything off now. And you've got a perfectly finished belt or backstrap ending. Now to take this off, what I would first do is double check. Supposing I wanted a 9-inch fringe on this part here, it comes from just above the string. So if there's a question of just where I'm going to cut, this might make a difference. I'm going to cut this right on both sides of the knots. I want to cut it while it's in the raised position. It's a little easier for me to do the next step if I do it that way. Cut and pull these through. It's so much against your instinct to cut a warp that that's always kind of a hair-raising moment. And then going to cut this above and below the warps. Then I'm going to pull these through perhaps. Now I've got my finger in there. It helps to keep those a little tight. Pull these through a few at a time. And then I have a piece of yarn here just to tie these so they won't get muddled, scrambled. And I have a stick here that says on it, shocked, so that I know that these particular heddles are for that particular loom. And I have other sticks with the names of my other Inkle looms on them. There's one that says Gilmore and there's one that says Hanson. And that way I can be sure of using the right heddles. I can just pick up a stick and I've got maybe 100 heddles all ready to go. Now I can just take the weaving off of the loom, put the loom aside, and do any further finishing. I'm going to show you now how to make a twisted fringe that you find also on Hopi belts. I'm combing this out prior to trimming the uneven end, being careful not to cut this beautiful piece of cloth I'm on top of. Now I want to take 2 strands of each of 2 colors, and I'm twisting these in the S direction, which is the same direction as the spin of the yarn. I want them both nice and tight. I have it, as you'll notice, under slight tension because I'm holding it down with my foot. Okay, so now I have both of them tightly twisted. I'm going to do an overhand knot here without losing any twist. Pull that tight. Now I kind of stroke it into position. It helps it to twist evenly. You have a nice, neat little fringe ending. I'll do that once more. This is just like the fringe are put on the strap for this bag here, only this yarn is a little bit thicker. And there are quite a few nice finishes. For instance, here my friend Alyona has put a 3-element braid and just loosely and rather nicely gathered the ends of the belt together like that. Many books have different information about these. Among them is this one, Finishes in the Ethnic Tradition, and I sometimes find nice endings in that. Now we'll go on and start considering the bag. I've designed this pattern for you to weave into a bag. Before we start on that, though, let's review 1 or 2 of the things that we have been weaving previously. Here are the symbols for the warping and symbols for the weaving. The pattern itself is very much more extensive, and I'm showing here the 3.5-inch width if you're weaving on a Gilmore or a Schacht or one of the slightly narrower looms. If you are weaving the 3.5-inch width, add a narrow border of 2 or 4 warps at the center edge. This bag will then have 62 pattern pairs instead of 61 in the one-piece 7-inch width bag warp. That means that you would repeat your center pair on the other half of the bag and add a little bit of a border that you then would sew together. If you have 8-inch pegs, you can warp it this way as a one-piece textile. And if you want really to see the whole thing at one time, you can photocopy that design or do it by hand, which is great training, and get the full size of the design. Then you need to calculate how much warp and refer to your printed instructions to see, for instance, the bag side is 15 inches, the fringe are allowing 20 inches, the other bag side is 15 inches. And with the warp take-up and the loom waist, this comes to at least 5 feet. Then you need to get all these other things together. You need to prepare for weaving the bag. So here are heddles. You've got to make quite a few of those. Again, refer to the printed directions. You want to weave, wind a yarn stick to plan your colors. Now, sometimes you may find that you wind quite a few of these before you're satisfied. It makes a good record of your thinking even. Then you want to choose the yarns and overspin the ones for the warp, but not the ones for the weft. And then you need to assemble all your tools for this. Anything that helps you read the pattern. Larger battens. Even sometimes I use a fairly big one on the 7-inch width. Any kind of picking sticks or shuttles. This little guy is very useful as a shuttle. So put in a picking stick and I'll show you later how to wind it. Here we have on the back here the 3.5-inch width, the left side of it, and the 3.5-inch width, the right side, with the little added border in here. These will sew together, or you can weave, of course, 2 pieces and then sew them together from the same loom. Over here we have the 7-inch width on a loom with 8-inch pegs. If you have a wide enough loom and are able to weave it in one piece. Before I start weaving on this wider warp, I'd like to show you how to make a real Indian shuttle out of this little stick here. Notice that it's tapered at both ends. You can do this just with a rasp or file. Now I'm going to do a tight winding there and then another one at this end. Then I can just go back and forth this way. And it gives you a really nice little shuttle for very little expenditure or effort. And just keep doing that until you have as much yarn on there as you want. I usually take it out to the ends of the points. It just looks nice that way. There. Just like this one here. Now on this loom, I have a warp that is almost completed for one bag. The fringe here is the unwoven area. After I had moved this around, I twined it so that it wouldn't fall off the sides of the pegs. Also, I have the tape on here to compare, keep a record of the length of the first bag side and to be sure that the second bag side is going to be the same length. Now, you want to be certain also that if you're measuring them, that you measure them both under tension or both relaxed, but not one the one way and one the other. Next thing that I need to do here is to rotate the warp a little bit, because I've woven almost up to the heddles. Now this is a little trickier on a wide loom. I'm going to release the tension as I would always if I'm rotating the warp or leaving the loom for any length of time. And so I can pull it down like this, moves it about a couple of inches at a time, and then I work the heddles back just a few at a time. I need usually to do this process maybe a couple of times. It's always easier with these closely slayed warps to move just a few warps or a few heddles at a time, because they have less of a tendency then to catch on each other. Now you can see how the weaving is coming up on this circular warp, and it's appearing now. We're coming full circle, literally. Now the next thing is to tighten the tension again. And I want to show you how to handle the picking on a large warp. I'm going to put my hand in here, and then I'm going to follow along the design where I have to drop one. Pick, and it's the same picking and dropping process that you're already familiar with. I'm just going to continue on in this way until I have reached the end of the design, and do a couple of rows of plain weave, 3 or 4 for the turnover at the end of the bag. You can see on the other end here that the bag ending, the design ends there. There's just a little bit extra. I have leeway if I want to turn over a little bit more or less, supposing the bag sides aren't quite equal. And I'll cover that, turn it in, and that will make the finished top of the bag. I'll just keep on weaving. Notice that I'm now picking with my left hand. It's easier over on the left-hand side with this wider warp. Now we're ready to finish the bag, so I'll do the ending area the same way that I did with the belt and remove the whole warp from the loom. Now I'm going to loosen the tension and get it off the loom. I don't have to worry about fringe measurements on this one because it's just simply going to turn in at the bag tops. So I'm going to cut it just plain where the knots are is the most convenient thing for me. Then I can separate the heddles very easily from the warp later. I'll just bundle these for the moment and take care of that after I've done these other things. So now we get to see what it looks like. Now we're ready to finish the bag, but first of all, see how different the design looks using different color schemes. And I want to show you different options for inserting the strap into the bag. First of all, we've got the strap going all the way down the side here and with twirled ends. That's a very nice way to do, and it makes the bag a little bit bigger if that's what you want. Now this one has quite a different arrangement. If for this one you would weave more wide pieces, then they fold over at the side like that, extend right over the top, come down the other side, and extend like that again. And lastly, we have this bag with a beautiful little ribete down the side, and this one you can learn to do on a subsequent tape that I made called Tubular Woven Finishes-Backstrap Loom Techniques. It's a tubular weave with a spiraling weft that sews right onto the side of the bag as you finish it. It also shows how to make a little 4-selvage strap here, or you can insert the strap that you have already made and just have the braids go in the side there. At this point, we want to flip the bag over and bring the two sides together, match them up. If I was going to put a ribete down the side, for instance, or make an inserted strap in, I would then sew these ends right after I had trimmed here. And I'm not going to trim too close because normally I would machine stitch this edge before trimming right up close. And then also I would machine stitch piece of grosgrain ribbon right over the top of that trimmed and stitched edge. That would turn in like that and stitch down. Do that first. However, just for now, I'll pin up the side, which matches pretty well. I'm just going to put a couple of pins in it because I'm doing this for the sake of making the fringe at the bottom. Now I dipped a little bunch of these already, and you see how curly they've gone. the wet ones have relaxed already. The whole point of this exercise of dipping the fringe warps in water is to get the warps to relax and twist properly. It sometimes takes the wool a wee while to absorb the water and really relax. I'm just going to squeeze it in, make sure they get really wet. I usually do about an inch width at a time. I don't wet a whole lot ahead of time because it may dry out, and also makes really more than I can handle in a certain amount of time. I just take out the excess water in a towel and now I'll put a foot on that part. This takes a little while. I want to separate out the end warp. And now I have a choice. I can either do it one at a time. This has got an overspin of an S direction, and so it's going to ply Z like that. I'm just helping it a little bit, and it'll stay there now forever and ever. It's got a wonderful little loop on the end. I don't know if you can see how that looks. And so it has no cut ends, and this is a sophisticated and very Peruvian solution to fringe making. Now I could also take maybe 2 or 3 or 4. I've got 3 loops now. I want to make sure they're all coming same direction. Got 4. The first time I did this, I thought it would be a shortcut. And 10 hours later, but that was a much finer thing. This won't take you 10 hours. Okay, so I'll twirl it and show you what a thicker bunch, especially if you do it a few at a time, it won't take as long. So now that also will stay. Even the one that I haven't twirled has nearly done itself just right. I'll just give it a little bit of back up twirling. And we have 2 now that are single if you want a very fine fringe, or a set of 4 to make a slightly thicker fringe. All right, after you get all of that done, probably you should give the bag a little wash to shrink it down to whatever its natural size would be, and perhaps steam press it, and you're all ready to go. To learn how to do this weave, this is the kind of study that I do. It shows the graphing of the original Peruvian design and then the weaving of it. If you can weave a traditional design and then design for yourself and find that weaving it works, then you probably have really understood the weave structure. This, incidentally, is the 10-hour fringe. And the ribetes are an authentic type of ribete, and so is the little strap. I've found that so many Indian weavers combine more than one technique in a textile. So with this bag, I combined not only the supplementary warp, but the ribete technique, complementary warp patterning, and a very fine plain weave band as a facing in here. It's done with an overspun maypole because it makes a thinner facing. That's a nice thing to do too. Now I'd like you to meet some of my friends. First of all, there's Sekinazoli number 1. Now he is a Navajo named lizard. It means he who crawls over rocks. Has the same supplementary warp patterning on the back, a little bit of plain weave on the front, and crocheted arms and legs stuffed with an armature inside, and really devilish button eyes. Next comes Sekinazoli number 2, and he developed an extra color. Is that kind of a lizard? He has gold and a wool color in each pattern pair, so each time you pick between those two colors adds a little bit of a dimension and a good deal more work time. The belly has just a little bit of patterning, and all the limbs are crocheted and stuffed with wrapped wire fingers and toes. And last but not least is the great python, and he is growing yearly, eats hand-woven mice, and has also this two-colored pattern pair to pick the different pattern areas from. Very different stomach because snakes are different on the underneath from the top. They have different type of scales. I hope that you have just as much fun using this weave structure creatively as I have.